My name is Clara, and by 31, I had all the pieces of a life that looked perfect from the outside. I had traded stage lights for stovetops, traded music for quiet dinners, and well-folded laundry. Once I had dreamed of being a singer, someone who could pull silence from a crowd with a single note. But reality bills, expectations, marriage settled in like a slow fog, and I told myself contentment was close enough to happiness. I met Daniel at a mutual friend's New Year's party. He wasn't dazzling, not in the usual sense, but he listened. That was rare. He laughed at the right times, asked about my favorite songs, and didn't flinch when I talked about quitting music. Within a year, we were married, and I left my small job at a local bank to build a life with him. But marriage is more than a ceremony and matching towels. It's who you marry into. His family lived 20 minutes away, close enough to visit, often too close to escape easily. His mother Eleanor was a woman of routines and rules, sharp words wrapped in silk smiles. From the first day I entered her home, I felt like a visitor, not a daughter-in-law. She inspected everything, my handshake, my pasta sauce, the way I hung bath towels. Nothing ever passed without a suggestion for improvement. And then there was Juliet. Daniel's younger sister was 28 with long black hair often braided by someone else's hands. They said she'd suffered nerve damage after a childhood fever. Couldn't walk, couldn't speak. She lived mostly in her room, her world reduced to sketches and an alphabet board. Eleanor treated her like a relic, something to preserve, not understand. But Juliet wasn't what I expected. There was light in her eyes, a quiet mischief that peeked through every time I visited. At first we sat in silence. Then she began showing me her drawings, lopsided cats in funny hats, trees with tangled roots, girls with wings. I laughed once, pointed to a scribbled figure with a messy bun, and signed me clumsily. She smiled and drew a halo above it. That day I started learning sign language. Daniel never asked why I stayed up late watching ASL videos. Maybe he didn't care, or maybe he assumed it was a phase, like his love. It was around our 2nd anniversary that the shift became undeniable. He stopped noticing me. Conversations turned into nods, dinners into silence. I'd wake up and find him already dressed, checking emails, saying he had to leave early. He never said I love you anymore. I tried to bring it up once he waved it off. You overthink too much, he muttered, eyes never leaving his phone. I turned to Juliet. She at least saw me. She signed mist when I skipped a visit. She drew me sunflowers when I looked tired. Sometimes I'd stay with her longer than I should have just to escape the hollow echo of my own home. Then one morning, Daniel stood in the kitchen like a stranger. My parents are going to Hawaii next week, he said, avoiding my gaze. Oh, I replied, half expecting a surprise. Maybe a long overdue vacation for both of us. It's just them and me. He paused. Actually, they asked if you could stay behind. Take care of Juliet. That was it. No invitation, no apology. Just a favor wrapped in an order. Eleanor arrived a few minutes later, confirming everything like it had already been decided. I agreed, smiling like someone who had learned not to protest. But inside, something cracked. 2 days later, after they'd left, I brought Juliet her favorite vanilla tea and opened the blinds in her room. She was lying still, gazing out the window. "Morning," I said softly. She turned her head, slowly pushed herself up and sat without help. My breath caught. Then Juliet smiled and said out loud, "Calm down. Don't freak out." The mug slipped from my hands. She stood up, no trembling, no hesitation. And in that moment I knew everything I thought I understood was about to collapse. Juliet poured the tea I had made for her carefully, like someone who had done it 100 times. Her fingers, steady and practiced, moved with quiet confidence. I sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the space where her wheelchair used to be. My world had tilted, and the person I thought I knew was someone entirely different. Start from the beginning, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She sat across from me in the small armchair, crossing one leg over the other. Clara, she said gently, I know you're shocked, but everything I'm about to tell you, it's the truth I've lived with for almost 20 years. She took a breath. Eleanor isn't my real mother. I blinked. What my father, Daniel's dad, had me with his first wife, Miriam. She died in a car accident when I was 8. I remember her vaguely, soft voice, the smell of peppermint. After she passed, he married Eleanor. Juliet's hands clenched in her lap, the knuckles whitening. That's when the world changed. Eleanor didn't want me around, said I was a constant reminder of the past. But my dad, he loved me. He stood up for me. And then he died, I murmured. She nodded. I was 10. Fever hit me hard. Eleanor didn't take me to the hospital until it was nearly too late. When I recovered, she started telling people I had suffered nerve damage, that I couldn't walk, couldn't talk. But why would you go along with it? Her gaze lifted to meet mine, because pretending to be broken gave me freedom. If I was incapable, she stopped trying to control me. She stopped hitting me. I got to draw to listen. I learned how people behave when they think you can't understand them. My heart twisted. All those years. I heard every whisper. I saw everything. She used to mock you, Clara. Said you were weak, that you didn't belong in this family, and Daniel, he used to be kind once, but he's his mother's son. He learned to mimic her poison, make it sound like concern. Tears threatened to rise, but I swallowed them down. And all this time, you just stayed silent. She tilted her head slightly. I was waiting for the right person to see me, for the right reason to speak. You gave me both. I looked away, unable to hold her gaze. I don't know what to feel. Betrayed, relieved, feel what you need to feel, she said softly. But don't feel alone. You were the only one who ever treated me like a human being. That's why I'm telling you this now. I stood up, pacing slowly across the room. And Daniel, does he know? No, Juliet said firmly. He thinks the act is still real. That's the thing about people like him, they never look closely. They just believe what's most convenient for them. My thoughts were spinning. So what now? Juliet smiled, and it wasn't the timid smile I'd grown used to. It was sharp, knowing. Now we make our move. I've been saving money. My father left me a trust before he died. Eleanor couldn't touch it, not legally. I've been keeping it for a moment just like this. I turned toward her, stunned. What kind of move? She stood, walked to her closet, and pulled out a small suitcase from behind the coats. They think they're sipping Mai Tais in Hawaii without a worry in the world. But we're going too. And when we get there, they'll learn just how loud I can be. I took a shaky breath, then looked her in the eye. You're serious? Juliet's grin widened. Dead serious. I'm done watching from the sidelines. And you, Clara, you deserve the truth they tried to bury. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. I felt seen. I felt chosen. And I knew we were about to rewrite everything. By the time Juliet unzipped the small suitcase, something had already shifted in the room. The air didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt electric. I watched her pull out a neatly folded itinerary, a small envelope, and a pair of sunglasses. I've been planning this for months, she said, laying everything on the table between us. I knew Eleanor would eventually push you too far. And Daniel, well, he was always going to show his true face. He just needed the right excuse. You were counting on all of this happening, I asked, half in disbelief. Juliet nodded. Not hoping, just preparing. I've spent years being underestimated. It gave me time, space. And no one asked questions when I stayed silent. She handed me the envelope. My fingers hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a round-trip plane ticket. My name was printed clearly on the boarding pass. Departing tomorrow morning. Destination Honolulu. You bought me a ticket, I whispered, heart pounding. Of course, she said, her voice matter of fact. You're the reason this plan works. You're the person they least expect to rise up. I sat down trying to process everything. What exactly are we going to do? Juliet picked up the itinerary. They're staying at a resort in Waikiki, 5-star. All the family meals are scheduled through the hotel concierge. Eleanor doesn't do spontaneity. I called ahead, booked us a room in the same resort, but under my father's name. Different building. They'll never know we're there until we want them to. And what do we do when we find them? Her lips curled into a knowing smile. We listen. We gather what we need. And then when the time's right, we confront them. But this isn't just about yelling at them across a dinner table. We need more than emotion. We need truth and evidence. Evidence, I repeated. Juliet pulled out a tiny voice recorder from a drawer. We plant this. Under their table. They won't even notice. You'd be surprised what people say when they think the world revolves around them. I held the recorder, feeling its weight like it held the answers I'd been craving for months. This is intense. This is survival, Juliet said gently. They've manipulated, excluded, and gaslit you for too long. Eleanor convinced herself that being cruel was motherly. Daniel let you become a footnote in his life. I looked up. And you? Why didn't you run away? Juliet's eyes softened. Because if I did, I'd still be running. And I'd be alone. But now I have you. The words wrapped around me like armor. I'd never felt more terrified or more empowered at the same time. For years I had swallowed every slight, every passive-aggressive remark, every cold shoulder. But now I was standing at the edge of something different, something righteous. Are you sure we can do this? I asked, still half in awe. Juliet's gaze sharpened. We're not going to cause a scene. We're going to peel back the mask they wear in public, quietly, precisely. And when it's time, they'll see that the women they dismissed are the same ones rewriting the story. I nodded slowly, feeling the pulse of resolve settle in my chest. Okay, let's do it. We spent the evening mapping out every detail. Flight check-in ride from the airport, where the recorder would be hidden when we'd slip into the restaurant. Juliet had thought of everything. She wasn't just brave, she was brilliant. By midnight, my bag was packed. Juliet handed me a second envelope before bed. What's this? I asked. Cash, she said. From the trust Dad left me. Enough to remind you that you never needed Daniel's support to stand on your own. I clutched it to my chest, tears stinging the corners of my eyes. You saved me, I whispered. Juliet shook her head. No, Clara. You saved me. Now let's go finish what they started. And with that, we were no longer the forgotten. We were the storm. The morning flight to Hawaii felt surreal. Juliet and I sat side by side in the economy cabin, pretending we weren't carrying a plan sharp enough to cut through years of silence. She wore a white blouse, her hair tied in a low ponytail, sunglasses, tucked on top of her head, like any other confident young woman off to paradise. But beneath that calm exterior was fire. I looked out the window as the plane lifted into the air. My hands were clenched tight in my lap. I wasn't afraid of flying. I was afraid of what we might uncover when we landed. After 6 hours, the wheels touched down in Honolulu. The warmth hit us immediately, ocean breeze, salt in the air, sunlight too bright to feel real. We slipped into a taxi Juliet had pre-booked and rode in silence as the city passed by. I clutched my small bag to my chest, the envelope of cash still hidden inside, like a charm I wasn't ready to part with. The resort stood like a palace on the edge of the ocean, grand and glowing. Juliet had booked us in the Southern Tower, same hotel, different wing. A strategic move. We were invisible unless we chose to be seen. At check-in, she used a different last name, her real one. The staff didn't blink. They handed us 2 key cards and a welcome drink. We smiled politely, then hurried up to our room. Juliet waited until the door closed to exhale. "They're here," she said, scrolling through her phone. "Just finished their spa session. Dinner at the poolside restaurant. 6 o'clock sharp. Standard Eleanor." I sat on the edge of the bed. "How are we going to get the recorder under the table?" She grinned and pulled out a resort staff badge from her backpack. I called in a favor. "Old friend of Dad's works here. One of the kitchen runners. You thought of everything." "I had time," she said softly, her expression hardening. "A lot of time." The day moved slowly. We stayed in resting, reviewing the plan. At 5:30, we slipped into simple evening clothes, me in a navy dress, Juliet in an emerald wrap jacket. We looked like tourists ready for cocktails, but we weren't here to relax. We took the long path to the poolside area, hiding behind tall palms and lattice screens. We found a spot with a clear view of their reserved table, and there they were. Eleanor regal in her oversized sun hat, sipping white wine. Daniel sitting beside her, laughing harder than I'd heard in years. And next to him, a woman I didn't recognize. She was younger, stylish. Her hand rested on Daniel's wrist like she belonged there. I stared, my breath caught in my throat. Juliet watched them carefully, lips pressed into a line. "That's her," she whispered. "The one he's been seeing." I saw messages once on Eleanor's phone. She called her Daniel's real future. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. Juliet reached into her bag and handed me a small earpiece. "The recorder's under the table. It's on. Just listen." I slid the earpiece in my hands, trembling. Their voices came through clear as crystal. "She's never been anything special," Eleanor was saying. "Didn't bring value to the family. At least this one has ambition." "I'm working with a lawyer," Daniel replied. "If we spin it right, emotional neglect or something vague, I won't owe her much. I can even argue for a settlement in my favor," good Eleanor said, sipping her wine. "You deserve better than that ghost of a wife. The girl beside you shines, compared to Clara like gold beside rust." The blood drained from my face. Juliet looked at me, her eyes asking if I'd heard enough. I nodded. Everything I had feared, the betrayal, the schemes, the way they tried to erase me, was no longer suspicion. It was truth caught on tape, and soon the whole world would hear it. Juliet looked at me, her eyes blazing, every trace of her old quietness gone. "Are you ready?" she whispered. I took a deep breath, pressing the earpiece into my pocket. "Let's give them the show they never saw coming." We stepped out from behind the row of palms' heels, clicking gently on the wooden deck as the resort's golden lights flickered to life around the pool. From a distance, it probably looked like a casual stroll. 2 women out for an evening walk. But to me, every step felt like a thunderclap. Daniel looked up first. His face froze, mid-laugh, wine glass in hand. Eleanor's gaze followed, then the woman beside him, the one who had replaced me so easily. Their expressions ranged from stunned to horrified in less than 5 seconds. "Good evening," I said loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. My voice was calm, firm. "Hope we're not interrupting." Clara Daniel choked. What are you doing here?" I didn't answer. I stepped to the edge of their table, and Juliet followed beside me, silent but standing tall. Every head at their table turned toward her in disbelief. "You're walking!" Eleanor gasped, voice shaking. Juliet gave a cold, quiet smile. "Yes, I've been walking for quite some time. I just didn't see the need to perform it for people who only noticed when they needed a prop." The younger woman beside Daniel quickly moved her hand off his. Her face drained of color. "Is this some kind of joke?" Daniel asked, standing now jaw clenched. "No," I said, pulling my phone from my purse. "But what I'm about to play is very real." I tapped the recording. His voice poured out of the speaker, loud and clear. "If we spin it right, emotional neglect, or something vague, I won't owe her much. I can even argue for a settlement in my favor." Gasps rippled through the surrounding tables. Someone dropped a fork. Eleanor reached for her wine glass, her hand trembling. I always wondered what the price of betrayal was, I said, locking eyes with Daniel. Apparently it's whatever your lawyer can get you away with. Daniel lunged toward me, voice hushed but desperate. You can't do this. Not here. I just did, I replied, voice icy. This is who you are. A man who brought another woman to paradise while his wife was left behind. A son who let his mother belittle me into silence. And a brother who never once saw his sister as anything but a shadow. Juliet stepped forward, then her voice sharper than I'd ever heard. And you, Eleanor? You told everyone I was brain damaged. You locked me away in that room and paraded me like a tragedy. But the only thing broken in that house was your idea of love. Eleanor opened her mouth, but no sound came. Just the dull clink of her bracelet as she fidgeted under the gaze of a dozen watching strangers. Enjoying dinner, I added, lifting my brow. I figured it was time you tasted what betrayal feels like. Daniel turned to the other woman. You believe me, right? This isn't what it looks like. She stood up quickly, backing away. You lied to me. You said she was unstable. Juliet tilted her head, a smirk tugging at her lips. He lies to everyone. It's how he breathes. Resort staff were beginning to gather now, murmuring through their radios. One of them approached politely. Excuse me, sir, he said to Daniel. We've had multiple guest complaints. We're going to have to ask you to leave. Daniel looked around, surrounded by judgment, disgust, and pity. His shoulders slumped. As he turned to walk away, Eleanor still seated, eyes hollow. Juliet looked down at her one last time. Silence, she said, isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. Then we walked away, two women once written off, now rewriting the ending. The moment we turned our backs on that poolside table, I felt lighter than I had in years, but it wasn't over. Not yet. Behind us, Daniel, always the performer when stakes were high, stumbled after us, his voice laced with panic. Clara, you can't just humiliate me like that. This is revenge. Juliet didn't even turn around. I did. He looked desperate. Eyes wide, suit jacket half-buttoned, his polished vacation veneer crumbling in real time. The man who once ignored me across our kitchen table was now chasing after me across a Hawaiian resort like a child who'd lost his toy. You humiliated yourself, Daniel, I said, turning to face him fully. I just held up a mirror. I lost my job, he hissed, stepping closer. If this gets out, oh, it will get out. Juliet cutting coolly, finally turning to face him. Corporate offices tend to care about employees who commit fraud, cheat on their spouses, and lie about caring for disabled family members. You don't know what this could cost me, he growled. No, I said, but I know what it cost me. My trust, my self-worth, my home. And it ends here. Two resort security officers had been trailing quietly behind us. One of them, a tall man in a blue blazer, stepped between us. Sir, we've received a formal guest complaint. You'll need to vacate the premises tonight. Management will send your belongings to your temporary residence. You're kicking me out, Daniel barked, eyes wide in disbelief. Yes, sir, the guard said calmly. Disturbing the peace, violating other guests' privacy, and creating a scene. We're obligated to intervene. Daniel looked around like he might find sympathy in the warm Hawaiian air, but no one offered it. No staff, no strangers, not even the woman he had brought along. She had vanished moments after the confrontation. I'll sue you both, he threatened, voice hollow. Defamation. Juliet stepped forward, her arms folded. We have audio recordings, proof of your infidelity, and text messages to Eleanor mocking me and Clara. You're welcome to try. He looked at me one last time, not with love, not even anger. Just defeat, like a man who realized too late that the chessboard had flipped. He turned and walked away with one of the guards beside him. The second officer looked at Juliet and me. "Are you both okay, ma'am?" Juliet nodded politely. "We are now. Thank you." As the security team disappeared down the palm-lined path with Daniel in tow, a strange quiet wrapped around us. The stars above seemed clearer, the ocean breeze softer. The noise in my head, the second-guessing, the constant wondering if I was enough, was finally gone. We sat down on a stone bench near the garden's edge. Juliet leaned back, closing her eyes for a second. "You handled that like a queen," she murmured. "So did you," I said. "They never saw you coming." She chuckled. "Good." I looked out at the waves crashing gently in the distance. For so long I thought strength meant staying, enduring, making excuses for him. "Strength is knowing when to walk away," Juliet said, "and when to stand." I turned toward her, a smile creeping across my face. "You know what's funny? What I don't feel broken anymore. I feel whole, like I finally stepped into my own life." Juliet looked at me for a long moment. "That's because you have." The laughter we shared wasn't loud or forced. It was soft, freeing, real. In that moment, I wasn't Daniel's wife. I wasn't Eleanor's disappointment. I wasn't a placeholder in someone else's narrative. I was Clara, seen, heard, and finally unshakably me. 2 weeks after returning from Hawaii, I walked into the office of a law firm in downtown Raleigh with a folder of evidence tucked under my arm and a steadiness in my step I hadn't felt in years. The receptionist offered me a warm smile as I gave her my name. "Clara Hart, here to see attorney Margaret Sloane." She nodded. "She's expecting you." Margaret was a tall woman in her early 50s, with salt and pepper curls, a handshake that meant business, and a look in her eyes that said she'd seen it all and would handle it all. "I've reviewed your email and attached files," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "Audio recordings, financial documents, photos. You came prepared." I nodded. "I'm not here for revenge. I just want what's mine, what's fair." She smiled. "Fair is exactly what I specialize in." I laid everything out, the timeline of Daniel's infidelity, the recordings Juliet captured, the financial trail showing vacation expenses, and even messages retrieved from Eleanor's backup phone Juliet had discreetly accessed. It was all there, cold, undeniable, damning. "This isn't just infidelity," Margaret said. "This is character assassination, financial manipulation, and third-party interference. We can file for divorce with grounds, and you're entitled to spousal support." "And the other woman?" I asked. "She's not off the hook," Margaret said. "North Carolina allows lawsuits for alienation of affection. Given what we have, her presence on the trip, her knowledge of your marriage, and those text messages, we can hold her accountable." I took a deep breath. "Then let's do it." The days that followed were a blur of legal filings, notarized documents, and court appearances. But this time, I wasn't scared. I wasn't hiding behind anyone's expectations. I was fighting for me. Daniel, of course, tried to delay everything, claimed the audio was taken without his consent, denied that the affair had begun before our separation. But the evidence crushed his excuses one by one. The judge wasn't impressed. In less than 8 weeks, I received notice the divorce was granted. Daniel was ordered to divide our marital assets evenly and pay spousal support for the next 3 years. His mistress, Rachel Stanton, was slapped with a civil lawsuit for alienation of affection. A court order demanded a compensation settlement based on emotional and reputational damages. When the first payment hit my account, I stared at the number on the screen. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the validation, the acknowledgement that I had been wronged, that my pain had weight, that my silence had ended for good. Juliet came over that evening. She brought sparkling cider and a bouquet of yellow daisies. "For your victory," she said, handing them to me. I didn't think I'd feel anything, I admitted. I thought maybe I'd be numb. And instead, she asked, settling onto my sofa, "I feel free." She raised her glass. "To being underestimated." I clinked mine against hers. "And to making them regret it." I'd started seeing a therapist too, something I never thought I needed. But talking to someone who didn't know my past felt like carving out a space for my future. I'd also begun consulting on small finance projects, rebuilding my career on my own terms. No one questioned my worth anymore. Juliet, meanwhile, had enrolled in a graphic design program in Asheville. "I used to draw to escape," she told me once. "Now I draw to build." One crisp Friday morning, as I looked over the city skyline from my apartment balcony, I realized something quietly powerful. This wasn't a comeback. It was a beginning. Daniel didn't define me. Eleanor didn't define me. Not anymore. I did. And for the first time, I wasn't asking anyone for permission to live my own story. 3 months after the court ruling, I moved into a top-floor apartment nestled just above Raleigh's tree-lined Pullen Park. The windows stretched wall to wall, bathing the living room in golden afternoon light, and at night the city lights shimmered like tiny stars that had dropped closer just for me. It was my sanctuary, quiet, warm, and mine. No footsteps echoing down the hall that made my stomach twist. No sharp knocks at the door expecting obedience. No more pretending. Each morning I brewed coffee the way I liked it. Strong vanilla oat milk, a pinch of cinnamon. I took calls from clients I respected and turned down projects that didn't align with who I was anymore. I was back in finance, but not the way it used to be. I worked from home as an independent consultant. Flexible hours, real freedom, no masks. Juliet had found her stride too. She'd moved to Asheville to share a place with a close friend and started classes in graphic design. We FaceTimed weekly. She always had a new sketch to show me fierce women, open windows, laughing mouths. Each one seemed to carry a piece of both of us. "You were the first person who ever saw me as whole," she told me once. I smiled. "And you were the first person who reminded me I still had a voice." The air in my new home was different. Still soft, like it had forgiven me for all the times I whispered instead of screamed. And then one ordinary Sunday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there, gaunt, unshaven eyes sunken with sleepless regret. Beside him was Eleanor, wrapped in a coat that no longer looked pristine. Her mouth was pressed into a thin, shaky line. Clara, Daniel began, voice barely above a whisper. "I know this is unexpected." I said nothing, arms folded against my chest. "We've lost everything," he continued. "My job. It's gone. The firm let me go after the lawsuit. Rachel left. And Eleanor, she's alone now. Her husband walked out on her. She has no money, no place to stay." Eleanor's gaze flickered to mine. For once, no fire in her eyes, just dust. "We were hoping maybe you could help us." Daniel finished, eyes pleading. I leaned against the doorframe and looked at them, these two people who once dictated my every move like I was a broken piece of their puzzle. "Funny. I once begged the two of you for compassion," I said slowly. "A kind word, a little space to breathe. And now it's your turn." Daniel opened his mouth again, but I cut him off. "I don't hate you," I said, "but I do regret giving you so much of myself. I let you shape my world in silence. That won't happen again." "We've changed," Eleanor whispered the words, sounding foreign in her voice. We have no one else." I paused, holding their gaze for a beat longer. "Exactly," I said, stepping back inside. "I won't go back to anyone who betrayed me." Then I closed the door, not angrily, not with spite, just with finality. I walked to the kitchen, opened the glass jar that sat beside my windowsill, and stepped back outside to the hallway. I reached down and sprinkled a small trail of sea salt across the threshold, a ritual, not magic, but meaning, to ward off what once was, to bless what was now. Back inside, I curled into my sofa, a cup of warm cider in my hands, the sunset spilling through the windows. It painted the walls gold, a new kind of gold one no one could take from me. And I realized something then: strength isn't holding on when it hurts. It's choosing to let go when it heals. I hadn't just walked away from a bad marriage. I'd walked back into myself. And in the echo of that closed door, I finally heard peace.